Asia Pop 40.
All right, guys, before we wrap this episode of Asia Pop 40, of Asia's top 140 songs of 2015, we had to do this. I wanted to do this. The producers wanted to do this. And it's only fitting, and it's only proper that we should. Just over 69 years ago, David Bowie, whose real name was David Robert Jones, was born in Brixton, South London, and later became known as one of the music and art world's most prolific and most important members. He burst onto the art pop scene of the late 1960s in London with his first album in 1967. Soon afterwards, Bowie had his first major international hit with Space Oddity, a space race themed take on Stanley Kubrick's massive motion picture from around the same time, 2001, A Space Odyssey. And that, my friends, reaching the top 5 in the United Kingdom in July of 1969.
This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door.
With the 1970s came glam rock, and Bowie, along with others, forced this genre into the mainstream, becoming responsible for probably the most inspirational and most influencing era of his career. His most notable track from this period was The Jean Genie, which was the B-side of Ziggy Stardust from the album Aladdin Sane. The music video was shot by none other than Andy Warhol.
I had created this one character, Ziggy Stardust, that it seemed that I would be the one that would play him because nobody else was doing my songs, and the chances of my actually getting a musical mounted were very slim. And so I became Ziggy Stardust for that period. And things sort of led. I liked the idea, and I felt really comfortable going on stage as somebody else. And it seemed a rational decision to keep on doing that. And so I got quite besotted with the idea of just creating character after character.
In the mid-1970s, David was heavily influenced by the soul movement in America, and he relocated to the US to write tracks like Young Americans, which is playing behind me right now.
But she wants the young American.
Later that decade, he moved to Berlin to begin work on what most critics would argue as the 3 most important albums of his career, Low, Heroes, and Lodger. Bowie began his extraordinary professional relationship with 2 iconic producers, Brian Eno and Tony Visconti, who are still producing incredible music today. These 3 albums became known as Bowie's Berlin Trilogy.
Oh, we can be heroes. Just for one day.
To cap off a decade of simply astonishing achievement, Bowie began working on his first album of the 1980s, Scary Monsters, which contains superbly arranged and produced tracks such as Ashes to Ashes and Fashion.
Ashes to ash and funk to funk it. We know Major Tom's a young.
Throughout the 80s, he released a number of commercial hits, many from the Let's Dance album, including China Girl, Modern Love, and of course, Let's Dance. During the 80s, he collaborated with Mick Jagger on Dancing in the Streets and Freddie Mercury on Under Pressure. Bowie later admitted that this period of commercial success was probably the darkest point in his career. It is no surprise then that during the 90s and the 2000s, Bowie concentrated on projects of the fringe art, including industrial soul, jazz, electro, and even jungle music projects.
That's okay. That's the terror of knowing what this world is about. Watching some good friends scream, let me out. Tomorrow gets me higher. What you want? People on.
After a decade of relative invisibility, Bowie released The Next Day 3 years ago, on his birthday, reuniting with Berlin Trilogy producer Tony Visconti. 3 years later after that release, again on his birthday, January the 8th this year, he released what Tony Visconti described as his parting gift. Tony knew about David's illness, and they both knew that this would be David's farewell gift to his fans. David Bowie was an inspiration to anyone who says that they are a musician and anyone who is a fan of music. People who knew him described him as a charming gentleman, and yet at the same time, he was undoubtedly the most disruptive and iconoclastic force in modern culture. It is literally impossible to summarize the impact of this man that fell to earth. His contribution to music and art can never ever be overstated. He bridged genres, he created genres, and ultimately he became a genre himself. He was a musical genius from a humble background who never ever lost his humility. His existence further defined the true meaning of the word artist. So to try and squeeze David Bowie's life into a few minutes of radio airtime is an injustice to the incredible body of work that David has left behind. So instead, Asia, I say this: let's dance instead. Asia, here he is right now, the late, the great, the one and only David Bowie. This is fashion. Rest in peace, brother.